Rachel Campbell. Today on episode 2 of Pedagogy Palooza, we're welcoming Professor Tania Broadley, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Education here at the University of Canberra. Tania, thanks so much for joining us on our second episode of Pedagogy Palooza. We really appreciate that you made the time to come and chat with us about SOTL, one of, I suppose, your favourite things.
One of my favourite things, absolutely. Well, teaching and learning, as you know, is my passion, and it's my role in the university to work with our staff and our students to ensure that we've got high quality teaching and learning. And part of that is absolutely how we think about the scholarship of learning and teaching.
I thought we'd break up our chat hopefully into two areas. Firstly, the way that students reflect and the way that we as staff reflect on our teaching. So do you have a sort of a go-to method or way of thinking about reflection in terms of like methodologies?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I think from my perspective, as an educator, we can really start to look at the educational theories that sit behind scholarship and reflection. And from a reflective space, there's a range of educational theories that support that. In my own work, I have drawn heavily along the sociocultural perspective, and it draws on those interactions around learning in community. So from my perspective, active participation with others in that shared experience really start to build that knowledge construction. And when you think about that from a reflective piece, it really is also a huge role for us to play as the educator around how we model that practice to students. So some of the strategies around that really are modelling, I guess, those kinds of reflective practices as the teacher yourself. And that's not always easy because, in an academic perspective, we kind of have built this construct of who we are and our identity of being an academic that doesn't always allow you to feel that you can be vulnerable in front of your students. But I think that actually really does play into how the academic and the teacher can start to model those experiences. So when I talk about vulnerability, I don't mean around your personal life, I mean around your teaching practice. So I start to think about that from how you unpack the way that you've taught and talk about that in terms of a visible learning kind of approach. So students understand what reflection looks like. And when I think about that also, one of the big parts that I talk about often is scaffolding. So not expecting the student to know how to go away and undertake reflection in their learning. And that often we do that when we set an assignment or part of an assignment that says, and now reflect. So scaffolding the student to get to that autonomous level of reflection that actually is meaningful is something that I think we need to be able to do well in our classrooms with our students.
Absolutely. And would you say also explicitly, I've been going down a bit of a metacognition spiral where you can have, metacognitive questions at the end of your assessment that might say, how did I approach this assignment? But it's got to be explicit, right?
Absolutely. And you do that by really starting from those smaller reflective tasks in the classroom, as you've suggested, and you start to see them developing that deeper level of metacognition. So they're thinking about their thinking, and you can start to hear them as they explain that to you. And I think that's when you start to move them more into your summative assessments rather than straight in. Because if you don't do that, the risk is the student will start to give you descriptive language, and that's not true reflection.
Yep.
Because descriptive language is just, I did this, then I did this, then I did this, rather than I applied this strategy or I designed this, and then on that sort of deeper reflective piece, these are the learnings from it. And you start to see that. And you start to see them talking about how they thought about that at every aspect of the design phase.
Yep. And I love that you talked about that, driving towards our students being autonomous learners, because that is a process too of getting them in the door. It's week 2 for us now. I've spent a lot of time last week with first year students, and they come with lots of anxieties, with low confidence about how they learn. And so it's helping them, I think, develop that autonomy in learning. But it's a process.
And the confidence to do that, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's how we set our students up for success.
Yeah.
And I think about that in terms of reflection. But a sort of applicable stance is also group work, right? So we also often think students will know how to go away and do group work, but it's the same concept. We really need to build those scaffolded approaches for them to be able to succeed.
Absolutely. That's I think so important about that explicit teaching. That's something I'm really passionate about too, because I think students can't live up to our expectations if we don't tell them what they are. And same with, going away and doing something in an autonomous way. We have to show them how to do that. We have to step them through it. I actually apply a Montessori lens to some of my practice because my daughter is a Montessori child, and I observed how carefully they teach these little kids to do something, even pouring water from one jug to another. It's this intentional skill building. So that's something that I feel really strongly about because I've seen it work, at various points. So I think that's really exciting sort of thing to explore.
And that's a really Montessori is an interesting philosophy. Alongside that, and I think I dropped the term earlier, is a similar sort of theory from John Hattie's work around visible learning. Yep. And so, you can do that with any age of learner. You can start that very young, and then you can take that all the way through to adult learning. And if you think about that as an adult learner, it does make sense to be able to understand what you're learning and why you're learning.
Absolutely.
And it gives you that kind of support process to get there.
It's kind of crazy that we think that we wouldn't do that as well because, Tony and I touched on last week about, academia being sort of has had a history of being elitist, we gatekeep information, but actually we do much better, and so do our students, if this is all visible, as Hattie says. And Hattie's written about visible learning at the higher ed, level, which I think just goes to show how powerful it can be, because I don't think we need to keep the secrets of learning. We need to say to our students, hey, here's why we're doing this. This is exciting, and this is how it's going to impact you, and how it's going to impact on your practice. I think especially for our art students, it's actually critical that we make that really, really obvious to them, especially in their early years.
And I think, picking up on what you've talked about there is there's a historical kind of approach to higher education, particularly from that long legacy of the way that we lectured at our students. Now, I think we've moved a long way from that, and certainly universities like ours have been very committed to applied learning.
Absolutely.
And when you think about that, there's this notion of really working with our students around taking learning to an applicable space. And so I would suggest we aren't the sage on the stage here, and we aren't the keeper of the content, right?
Absolutely.
We are more about building those meaningful learning experiences for
applying into the world of work, or the
Yes.
real world of life. And I think from an art and design and creative practice space, those disciplines have always lent themselves to being that kind of opportunity. The way that, design studios are scaffolded, or, that sort of model of design and the design thinking background, I think, brings a natural tendency to that kind of approach. So you're strong in that here.
I think you're right, and because often we are journeying with our students creatively, we're not coming from that chalk and talk kind of thing anyway, because we're just saying, hey, we're going to go through it together, we're going to ask lots of questions that maybe we don't answer, but that's okay. So I think you're right that our discipline does have more opportunities in it than some others.
Absolutely.
So I'm keen to sort of think about how we travel from student reflection to educator reflection. So if an educator is sort of starting out in using sort of innovative reflective pedagogies, what sort of advice would you have for them?
My approach to innovation always comes with a lens of technology. So I do have a technology background myself, from a teaching and learning perspective. And I think there's a range of technologies that an educator can use to support that for their own practice, but also for their students to be able to support their reflective practice. And so, we can start with big picture ideas around e-portfolios and how you might support and scaffold through an e-portfolio approach to assessment, but more than to assessment, kind of to support the learning journey. But, I think the models that you have in your faculty are also really, you can draw upon and use. So, we're doing a podcast. Students using podcasts, staff doing their own podcasts and talking about their reflective practice of their teaching and learning is a really nice way to frame your scholarship, right? and sort of becomes to your faculty particularly, but also to others across the university, as a really nice way of building your reflective practice in your teaching and learning. So that's one way, blogs, e-journals, that kind of using technology to support your practice and share and disseminate between your academic community and broader. So that's the nice thing about technology now. We use it to go global. And Absolutely. You see that happening. We've got some great examples of academics here who are going global with their teaching and learning.
And that's critical, isn't it, to share and to talk. Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking a little bit last episode about our tendency to be maybe a bit guarded about our practice because it's a vulnerable space to share things, or to say, oh my God, I just had the worst shoot ever and it went totally wrong and I don't know what happened. But actually that's so critical, is to open up to colleagues and to, throw ideas around and see what works and what doesn't work.
And what you've just talked about comes back to that piece at the beginning. I spoke about vulnerability, right? Because when you think about scholarship and reflection, you don't want that to always be neat and tidy with a bow on it, because that's not modelling that kind of practice of it's okay to try something and then talk about why it didn't work.
Yep.
And if you're not innovating, you kind of don't fail. But if you're not failing, you didn't really innovate. So how do you bring that thinking to being, taking measured risks so that you can actually build your own scholarly practice? But students start to see that as well and talk about it with them.
Yeah, I think that modelling is so critical. We talked a little bit about that last week with excellence. Like, modelling excellence to your students often means that they'll echo it back to you and you don't even have to have the discussion. And I think it's the same with that vulnerability, bringing a braveness to your discussions in shoots or in classes, workshops and things, that they'll often then give that back to you. So I think that reciprocal nature of it is such a lovely part of what we do. If we're talking about reflection, but, other things as well, about learning to fail, make mistakes, that it's okay to, completely mess it up because tomorrow's a new day.
Absolutely. And, I think that is the most important part is, taking the learnings. And that's what reflection really should be doing, is moving from, a surface level learning, or maybe, if you think about the Bloom's taxonomy, which is a big part of our course design here, if you think about those lower levels, taking that really then to the deeper level, reflection can bring that to the learning journey. And then that's a really important process. So you come in the next day and you talk about what you tried, why you tried it, and, maybe even whose work you modelled it on. Or what research paper in educational design that you read the week before and thought, actually, that might work for this, but maybe it didn't. And those learnings about the application are just as important as the successes.
Absolutely. That sort of brings us to fostering a culture of continuous improvement. And obviously that's something that you're heavily involved in with your role as PVCE. How do you go about that? How do you go about fostering this environment of continuous improvement where we have those vulnerabilities, those safe places, I guess, to fail? How do you do that in your role?
So how I do that in my role, and it's something I probably take pretty seriously, to be honest, which is why I have evolved into the role I have. I think there's always room for improvement. And that's from my own personal self, but also to those I work with. So it's not broken. Nothing's ever broken. We're doing a great job in the work we're doing. But how do you be the best you can be, and how do you show that for students? It's always that continuous improvement process. And to my mind, it's about explicitly talking about where you think things are going well, but also where you see maybe that opportunity to try new things. And that's where continuous improvement comes from, because and you're not just pulling this stuff out of thin air. You're reading, you're researching, you're collaborating with your networks of whoever that might be in your discipline area. Or for me, I work across universities with people in my roles. And I ask them, how are you doing this, and what's working for you at the moment? Another thing I tend to do is the quilt data is something that's very important to me. So the quality indicators of learning and teaching, it's KPIs for the university, it's in my role, and it should drive some of the excellence in our learning and teaching here to be able to ensure that we are competitive across this country. and doing the best work for our students. So for me, I say to people, I look at people's quilt data and I'll go to them and say, you're doing really well in student support. Tell me what it is that you think's working for you. And that might be their services in the student life area, or it might be some practices in their assessment policy that is really bringing to life students being supported in different ways. There's a whole range of things.
That might be a surprise to hear from that when our colleagues listen to this, because I think sometimes we think that people in senior management look at data and they look for like the red. We get we get the spreadsheets with all the red. But I actually love hearing that you're looking for places where people are excelling and you're going to them and saying, hey, let's celebrate that, but also let's share it. That must be an exciting part of your job then, to look for people who are really shining or areas that are doing really well.
I actually think that's the key to successful continuous improvement, because coming at it from a what are we doing badly and going down to say what are we doing badly, that's not going to help us. It's what is it that others are doing really well, how do we learn from them. We don't want to be the same, because our context is always very different. Every university has a very different context. Yeah. But the opportunities to learn from others sort of feeds into that whole self-reflective practice, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So is that the main way, I guess, that you here at UC support faculty to engage with, that scholarship of teaching and learning sort of practice? It is what else, does the institution do, I guess, to support that area? Because it's on the PDPs, it pops up in the box.
Yes. And that's a new thing. That's a new thing popping up in the box, a couple of years maybe.
And I think even a refinement for this PDP round of what's being asked. Yeah. But it's so much more than just about the box. So how do we embed that?
It's way more than the box.
It really isn't about the box at all. But,
Do you know what the box is for? Do I need to explain the box? Or do you think people
try? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, okay. So the box came about because, as you all know, we're going through our TEXA reaccreditation. Now that's important from my perspective, because it's our licence to operate at the university. And I've been an academic and I've worked in schools, and you don't always understand why some drivers come out of different aspects of the university leadership. So I think it's important that staff understand the box is there actually to support them to capture their own scholarship of learning and teaching, but also for the university to be able to show that we have a process, we take this seriously, and this is the way that staff can demonstrate how they have engaged in scholarly practice. So it's a really important part, actually, of the TEXA reaccreditation, and it is one that TEXA has put a very strong lens to over a number of years. We've even seen some universities go on conditional status around that because they didn't have a process of capturing. Now, something we learnt last year when the box came in, I think it was the first time last year, what we found was some of the data being provided maybe didn't bring what true scholarship of learning and teaching is. And that might be for a number of reasons. It might be because people don't understand what it is, and that's fair enough. Or it might be that people don't see the value in it. And that's something I think you're going to try and address through these conversations.
Absolutely.
So from my role, I see my role as a real privilege, because what I get to do at the university level is to support really the policy space around driving great practice. So, we can provide policy that structures some of that governance aspect of why, of how and why, and that feeds into our TEXA reaccreditation. It also should give a North Star for academics to understand what we're trying to achieve in that scholarship of learning and teaching, but also the professional development space. Now, there are faculty groups, there are communities of practice, there are just individual academics, I would suggest, who are showing leadership, and that is really important. We would need all levels of professional development, and so supporting staff with understanding what is and what is not scholarship is probably a good place to start. And we rely heavily on the TEXA guidance note around that to be able to support that, because that's kind of aligns then with where we're going from a reaccreditation point of view.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful context for staff to understand where it's coming from. As you say, sometimes things come from above and you know, we think, oh, okay, that's interesting. I wonder why we're doing that. But, you know, I love teaching, so I think scholarship around it is really important. Just like we would have good scholarship around all of the research that happens in the university, so too should we have it around our teaching.
Correct.
I want to just finish by asking you your top tip for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Could be something easily implementable for staff. It could be something really exciting that you've come across that you want to share, whatever, you know, your number one top tip, your dream for us, I guess, for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. What would you like to share?
My top tip is it's okay to fail. And what I would suggest by that is have a go. So there are multiple ways that you can really start to think about Scholarship of Learning and Teaching. We have got people doing absolutely fantastic things here. And we often see those top people coming through in the teaching awards and other things, but everybody just needs to engage in it for their own practice. And what I would suggest is start small. So do something that you think you can actually implement in your teaching and learning. And that might be having a look across the literature from, group tasks. How do you actually facilitate good group learning in the classroom? Or how do you scaffold a certain type of strategy in the teaching space and bring learners on that journey in a visible way? And you do that by looking at the scholarly literature. So there's a lot of educational literature out there that supports, it might not be your discipline, but you could apply it. So start with something small that way. Ideally, I'd really like to see people publishing on what they're doing because, you know, from an educational research point of view, you can actually take a strategy out of a different paper or literature set and apply it and then publish. Tell the world about it. If it's not around an article because, you know, writing might not be your favourite task, but, you know, make podcasts, do blogs, share it with the world, and I think that's where I would suggest is the top tip. Get engaged.
So start small, something in the classroom, but then go big with it. I love that.
And I think, you know, once you start small, you'll get a taste for it anyway. And if you're an education-focused or a learning and teaching enthusiast like I am, you'll want to be able to see these things coming to fruition and you'll want to show evidence because when I think about what we want for our students, we kind of want it for ourselves, and that's around evidence of impact. So what impact are we having and how do we show that?
Absolutely. I think we've covered some really, really interesting things. Thank you so much for making the time to chat to us. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the series as well.
And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm very happy to come back and talk about other fabulous things that you'd like to talk about.
We would love that so much. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode of Pedagogy Palooza. Next time, we'll be welcoming Dr. Rob Gray, teaching and learning expert. Who'll share easy things we can implement in our everyday practice.